The shotgun was pointed at Luke Carter's chest when he first heard he was getting married. The barrel did not shake. Old Sheriff Boyd's hand was steady, his eyes flat as dry stone. The whole town of Dry Creek watched from the wooden walkways. Horses stamped. A dog barked once and went quiet. No one laughed. No one spoke. They were waiting to see if Luke would fight or fold. Luke stood in the dust, shirt torn, knuckles split from the saloon brawl that had started it all. He was tall and broad, with sunburned skin and a jaw that always looked like it wanted to clench. He had spent his life roaming cattle trails and dry valleys, never staying in one place, never tied to anyone. He was a man who could ride from Texas to Montana and leave nothing behind. Now the sheriff was telling him he had two choices: marry or go to prison. "You broke his arm, Luke," Sheriff Boyd said, nodding toward the man groaning on the ground near the saloon doors. "You busted up the brass lantern. You wrecked half the bar. Judge is tired of you drifting in and out like a dust storm. You settle down, here, with her, or you sit in a cell for 5 years." The word "her" hung in the air. Every head turned as a woman stepped out from the crowd. Her name was Clara Hayes. Folks in Dry Creek called her an old maid when they whispered behind her back. She was 29, which in town talk was almost ancient for an unmarried woman. She wore a plain blue dress that had been washed so many times the color had faded. Her brown hair was twisted into a tight bun at the back of her head. She had rough work hands and a straight back. Clara did not look like the painted saloon girls who liked to flirt with cowboys. She did not swing her hips or bat her eyes. Her face was calm, quiet, and tired, in a way that came from years of doing everything alone. She did not smile at Luke. She just looked at him with steady hazel eyes. Luke stared back. His first thought was that this was some kind of joke. His second thought was that the sheriff might actually pull the trigger if he laughed. "Why her?" Luke asked, his voice low. "Because she needs a husband, and land is tied to a husband," Sheriff Boyd said. "Her daddy died and left the Hayes place to her. No man to help. No one to stand between her and the outlaws who have been eyeing that ranch. You broke the law. The judge says you can pay it off by taking on a duty. You marry Clara. You work the ranch. You keep out of trouble. Or I put you in irons." Clara's fingers tightened around the small Bible she held, but she did not speak. She had grown up in Dry Creek. She knew what people said about her. Too plain. Too serious. Too old. Men looked past her like she was part of the furniture. No one had ever fought to stay by her side. Now the town was forcing a man to do it. "I am not some horse you can trade," Luke snapped. "Then sit in a cell and stare at four walls," Sheriff Boyd said. "You ran wild long enough. Time to choose something." Luke looked past the sheriff at the wide open land beyond town. The sky stretched forever, pale and endless. The thought of losing that to iron bars settled like a rock in his chest. His jaw worked. He looked at Clara again. She was not pretty in the way men bragged about. But there was something strong in the way she held herself. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman who had been dealt a hard hand and had decided to stand anyway. "Fine," Luke said. The word tasted bitter. "I will marry her." A murmur rolled through the crowd like wind through grass. The sheriff lowered the shotgun. That afternoon, with half the town watching, a preacher stood on the steps of the small white church and said the words. The ring on Clara's finger had belonged to her mother. Luke's hands were rough and warm when he slid it on, his touch quick, almost angry. Clara's voice did not shake when she said, "I do." When it was over, no one threw rice or cheered. Folks drifted away, whispering. Some shook their heads. A couple of cowhands snickered at Luke, then went silent when he turned his hard eyes on them. Clara and Luke rode out of town on the same wagon, sitting a full arm's length apart. The Hayes Ranch lay a few miles from Dry Creek, past a wide field of dry grass and scrub. The house was small but solid, its white paint peeling in thin curls. A barn leaned slightly to one side. A chicken coop stood near a patch of soil where corn stalks fought their way up through hard ground. In the distance, low hills rolled under the sun. Luke stepped down from the wagon and took it all in. He saw broken fence posts, a roof that needed patching, a corral gate held up with frayed rope. This place was hanging on by a thread. "You have been running this alone?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, "since my father passed last winter." He heard the quiet weight in her voice when she said it. Luke had lost people, too. His father to fever when he was 16. His mother to hunger the next year. He had learned young that the world did not stop for grief. He dropped his bag on the porch. "I will take the barn," he said. "You keep your house." Clara's lips pressed together, but she did not argue. "Supper is at 6, she said. "If you want it." The first days felt like a Cold War. They worked side by side without speaking more than they had to. Luke fixed the fence, repaired the barn door, checked the well. Clara cooked, fed the animals, kept the books at the small table by the window. At night, lamplight glowed in the house, while Luke lay on a pile of blankets in the hayloft, staring up at the dark rafters. He told himself he was here because the law forced him. He told himself he would do his time, then leave. He would not get tied to this ranch or this woman who watched him with those quiet eyes. Yet Luke began to notice small things. He saw the way Clara rose before dawn each morning, no matter how late she had stayed up mending clothes the night before. He saw the way she paused at her father's old hat on the wall, her fingers touching the brim for a heartbeat. He heard her humming soft hymns as she kneaded bread, the sound gentle and steady. One evening he came in from fixing a section of fence, with his shirt clinging to his back and dust in his hair. A storm had been building all day. Dark clouds crowded low over the hills. Thunder rolled far off. Clara was standing on the porch, looking at the sky. "You should tie down anything loose," Luke said. "That storm will hit hard." She nodded. "I know. I have handled storms before." A crack of lightning flashed, followed by a sharp roar of thunder. The horses in the corral snorted and stamped. The wind picked up, sending dry leaves dancing across the yard. As the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, Luke saw something that made his chest tighten. The old barn roof, already weak, shuddered under the force of the wind. A section of it lifted and slammed back down. Inside that barn, in a small pen in the corner, was the one thing Clara had left from her father's last season of breeding. A young bay mare, her coat dark and sleek, her eyes wide and nervous whenever the wind howled. Without a word, Clara hitched up her skirt and ran straight toward the barn. Luke cursed under his breath and took off after her as the storm came crashing down on the Hayes ranch. The wind hit like a wall when Clara reached the barn doors. Rain slashed at her face, soaking her hair and dress in seconds. The doors rattled on their hinges as if they wanted to tear free. "Clara, wait!" Luke shouted, but his voice was snatched by the storm. She grabbed the heavy wooden handle and yanked. The doors stuck for a moment, then gave way. The barn groaned under the weight of the wind. Dust and hay swirled in the air. The young bay mare screamed, kicking against the boards of her small pen. Clara slipped inside. Thunder cracked so close the ground shook. Luke pushed in behind her and slammed the barn door shut. For a moment the world went dim, lit only by lightning that flashed through the gaps in the broken roof. Rain streamed down through fresh cracks. The rafters creaked in a low, warning moan. "That roof will not hold," Luke said. He could feel the whole place shiver with each gust. If the roof gave way in one piece, it could crush anything below it, including the mare. Including Clara. Clara moved toward the horse, talking in a soft voice that shook only a little. "Easy, girl, easy now. It is just a storm, just noise and light. You stay with me." The mare tossed her head, eyes rolling white. Clara reached for the halter. Her wet dress clung to her legs, making it hard to move fast. Luke saw a beam above them split with a sharp crack. "Clara, get out of the pen," he barked. Not without her. She shot back. Another bolt of lightning lit the inside of the barn bright as day. Luke saw the crack widen in the beam overhead, saw the way the roof sagged. He did not think. He moved. Luke vaulted over the low gate of the pen and grabbed the mare's halter along with Clara's hand. The horse reared, jerking them both forward. Luke planted his feet and pulled hard, using the strength that had hauled cattle out of river mud and held wild broncs for branding. "Move," he said, voice low and sharp. "Now, Clara." She did not argue this time. Together they dragged the panicked horse out of the pen, step by hard step. The mare fought the whole way, hooves slipping on the wet hay, nostrils flaring. Rain hammered the barn roof like fists. They were halfway to the barn door when the cracked beam above the old pen gave up with a terrible splintering sound. "Down!" Luke shouted. He shoved Clara hard, knocking her to the ground and throwing his own body over hers. A section of the roof crashed where they had just been, sending wood and dust flying. The old pen vanished under broken boards. The mare screamed again, dancing sideways, but stayed on her feet. The rope went tight in Luke's hand, burning his skin. He held on, teeth bared, while debris bounced around them. For a long moment all they could hear was the roar of the storm and the wild drum of their own hearts. Then the barn settled again, though every gust made it groan. Luke lifted himself off Clara, breathing hard. Her face was pale under the streaks of mud and rain, but her eyes were clear. "You all right?" he asked. She touched her arm, her ribs, then nodded. "Yes." "You?" "Fine," he said, though his shoulder throbbed where a piece of wood had clipped him. The mare trembled beside them, sides heaving. Clara pushed herself up to her knees and reached for the horse's nose with gentle fingers. "You did good, girl," she murmured. "You are all right. You are safe." Luke watched the way the mare's shaking eased at the sound of her voice, the way Clara's own hands steadied as she soothed the animal. There was fear in her eyes, but there was something else too. Steel. She had not thought of her own safety first. She had run into danger without a second thought. He had known reckless courage in men on cattle drives. That was different. This was quiet, simple, and it reached inside him in a way he did not expect. "We have to get her to the stone shed," Luke said, nodding toward the small storage building outside. "Roof there is solid. Barn will not last through the night." Clara glanced at the broken rafters and nodded. "All right." They pushed the barn door open again. Wind and rain surged in, cold and sharp. Together they led the mare through the storm, heads bent, boots slipping in the mud. The horse balked once at a loud crack of thunder, but Clara kept talking to her, and Luke kept the rope tight. By the time they got the mare into the stone shed and bolted the door, all three of them were soaked. Clara's hair had come loose from its bun. Wet strands stuck to her cheeks and neck. Her dress clung to her like a second skin. Luke looked away, jaw tight, not wanting to see more than he should. "Thank you," she said, wiping water from her eyes. "You did not have to help." He snorted. "I am not about to watch a new horse die or a fool woman get crushed." He regretted the last part as soon as he said it, but the words were out. Clara's chin lifted. For a second he thought she would snap back. Instead she looked at him in a strange, steady way. "You think I am a fool for caring about what my father left me," she said, "but you ran in too." Luke opened his mouth and then shut it. He had no good answer. "Storm will pass," she added, voice softer. "It always does." Quote. They stood in the shed, listening to the rain pound the roof. The air was thick with the smell of wet horse and damp stone. The mare finally lowered her head, blowing out a long breath as if she had decided the world was not ending. Luke looked at Clara's hands, still resting on the horse's neck. They were small, but the veins stood out from years of work. There were pale scars across the knuckles. These were not the hands of a helpless woman. When the worst of the thunder moved on, they stepped back out into the softer rain. The barn was in bad shape. A whole section of the roof had caved in, leaving a yawning dark hole. Wood lay scattered across the muddy yard. "Barn is half gone," Luke said. "I know," Clara replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes lingered on the damage. "We will fix what we can. That is what Hayes do." "Just you now," he said before he could stop himself. She looked at him. Lightning flashed far away, turning the hills into blue shadows for a heartbeat. "Not just me," she said quietly. "I have a husband now." The word hit him in a strange way, like a stone dropped into deep water. Husband. He had signed his name in the church book. He had said the vows. They wore rings. But hearing her say it, as if she believed it, made it feel more real than the whole ceremony. That night, Clara lit extra lamps in the house. The storm had left her with a chill that would not leave her bones. She moved more slowly than usual, wincing when she lifted a pot. Luke noticed. When she thought he had gone back to the barn, she leaned against the table and pressed a hand to her ribs. Her breath caught for a moment. He stepped into the doorway. "You are hurt." She straightened at once. "It is nothing, just a bruise." "Let me see," he said. "I said it is nothing," she snapped, color rising in her cheeks. He crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped an arm's length from her. "You took a hit when I pushed you down. If you broke anything, you will not be able to lift or bend, and this place will fall apart. I am not asking. Let me see." They stood there, locked in a quiet stare. Clara's eyes searched his face as if she was trying to decide what kind of man he was. The wild drifter who started fights, or the one who ran into a collapsing barn to protect a horse he did not even own. At last she sighed and turned slightly away, fingers moving to the buttons at the top of her dress. Her hands shook. Luke felt heat rise in his neck. He reached out and gently caught her wrists. "I will get the doctor," he said, voice rough. "You keep your dress on." Her eyes widened a little. She had expected something else. She had seen the way some men looked at her in town when they thought she did not notice. A woman alone was easy to take from. "All right," she whispered. Luke went out into the night and rode to Dry Creek. The town doctor, a tired man with gray hair and kind eyes, grumbled at being dragged out of bed but came anyway. He checked Clara's ribs behind a closed door while Luke sat at the table staring at his own hands. When the doctor came out, he gave his verdict. "Bruised, not broken. She needs to rest. No lifting heavy buckets, no hauling wood alone. You will have to carry the load for a while, Carter." Luke nodded. "I can do that." The doctor glanced at him. "Marriage is not the same as a jail term, son. You do not just wait it out. It changes a man if he lets it." When the doctor left, the house grew quiet again. Luke fetched more wood for the fire, his mind full of the doctor's words. He found Clara sitting in her father's chair, a blanket around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, falling in waves down her back. Without the tight bun, she looked younger, softer. "What did he say?" she asked. "That you are stubborn and bruised," Luke replied. A small smile touched her lips before she could stop it. It was gone in a moment, but he saw it. It changed her whole face. "I can still work," she said. "Do not think this means I will sit idle." "I know better than that," he said, "but you will not lift the heavy things." "That is my job." She watched him for a long moment, as if measuring his words. "You did not want this marriage," she said. "You made that clear." He did not deny it. "Why are you trying so hard, then?" she asked. Luke looked at the fire, at the way the light moved over the worn boards of the floor, over the small few things that made up Clara's whole life, the old Bible, the faded picture of her parents, the hat on the wall. "Maybe I am tired," he said slowly. "Tired of running, tired of leaving wreckage behind. Maybe I owe this town a debt. Maybe I owe you a fair try." He did not say the other thing that was forming like a quiet thought at the back of his mind, that when she had run into the storm, something in him had moved in a way it had not moved in years. Clara sat very still. In her chest, something small and careful opened just a little, like a door not yet wide enough to step through. Outside, the rain eased to a soft patter. The storm had passed, but the world it left behind was changed. Neither of them knew that someone had watched the chaos from the ridge above the ranch. A rider in a dark coat sat on a black horse, hat pulled low, eyes on the damaged barn, and the small house with its warm light. He turned his horse and rode back toward the hills, a slow smile on his face. The Hayes place looked weaker than ever, and men like him liked weak things. The next weeks changed the rhythm of the Hayes ranch. Luke rose before dawn and did most of the heavy work the doctor had warned Clara about. He carried water, chopped wood, hauled feed. Clara still moved from chore to chore, but she did it with a hand pressed to her side when she thought he was not looking. He always saw. Sometimes he took the bucket from her without a word. Sometimes she let him. Sometimes she tried to snatch it back. And they stood there for a moment, both holding on, both stubborn. Then one of them would give in. Little by little, the fights turned into a sort of rough dance that only they knew the steps to. At night, they shared supper at the small table. At first, the silences were long and stiff. Slowly, words crept in. Luke told her about the cattle drives he had worked on, the stampedes, the dry rivers, the long days where the sun felt close enough to burn a man to ash. Clara told him about winters when the snow came up to the windows, and she had to break ice in the well with an axe just to get water. She laughed once when he described a trail cook who had burned the beans so badly the men swore they could use them as bullets. The sound surprised both of them. Her laugh was soft and bright, and it pulled something in his chest tight. Luke found himself saying more just to hear it again. But the ridge above the ranch was not empty. The rider who had watched the storm came back more than once. His name was Jonas Pike. Years ago he had ridden with a gang that robbed stages and rustled cattle. The law had driven him out of most towns, but the hills still had room for men like him. He had long ago decided the Hayes land should be his. Old man Hayes had kept a shotgun by the door and an eye on the horizon. Jonas had waited. Now the old man was gone. There was only a woman and a drifter with a bad record. One cold morning, Luke found the main gate hanging open, tracks of 3 horses cut across the yard. A chicken lay dead by the coop, neck snapped and tossed aside. He knelt to study the tracks. The hoof prints went straight past the house toward the back pasture. Clara came out onto the porch, shawl tight around her shoulders. "What is it?" Quote. "Someone rode in during the night," Luke said. "More than one." They did not bother to hide it. Fear flashed across her face, then settled into a hard line. "The herd," she said. They saddled up at once and rode out. The back pasture held the small herd of cattle her father had kept. It was not much, but it was all she had. When they reached the ridge, Luke saw dust in the distance and moved his horse up faster. 6 longhorns were missing. The fence at the far edge of the pasture was cut clean. "Rustlers?" Luke said, jaw tightening. Clara stared at the broken wire. Her hands shook on the reins. "They took my father's stock," she said, voice thin with anger. "They think this land is easy now." Quote, Luke felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Somewhere in the hills, men were driving away what little the Hayes place had left to live on. "They were bold enough to ride up close," he said. "They will be bold enough to come back." "Then we will be ready," Clara replied. That night Luke oiled his revolver at the table. Clara watched him, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she was not really drinking. "Who do you think it is?" she asked. "Could be some drifters," he said. "Could be Jonas Pike. I have heard his name in town. Sheriff says he has been sniffing around these hills for years." She looked at the fire. "My father said there was a man who wanted this ranch. He never said his name. Just called him the Vulture." Luke slid the gun back into its holster. "If he comes picking at your bones, he will find teeth waiting." Clara gave him a sharp look. "This is not just my fight, Luke. It is yours, too. You are tied to this land now." He knew she did not only mean the law. They set watches. Luke slept lighter than ever. Clara kept the rifle near the door. The air around the ranch felt tight, like the deep breath before a gunshot. The trouble came 3 nights later. The moon was thin and high. The fields lay in silver and shadow. Luke sat in the barn, sharpening a knife, ears tuned to every sound. A coyote called far off. The horses shuffled in their stalls. Then he heard it, A small click, a soft creak, the sound of a back gate being opened, slow and careful. Luke moved like a shadow, slipping out of the barn and into the night. He stayed close to the dark side of the house, hand on his gun. He saw them then. 3 figures near the corral. One held a lantern, its light hooded and low. Another cut at the fence with a pair of wire cutters. The third sat on a horse a little distance away, watching everything. Luke knew at once that was the leader. The man sat easy in the saddle, like he was not worried at all. Luke stepped out of the shadow, gun raised. "That is far enough," he called, voice flat. The men at the fence froze. The rider turned his head, and the lantern light caught a thin, pale scar across his jaw. "Evening, Carter," Jonas Pike said, as if they were meeting on a street in town. "Fine night for moving cattle." "You are trespassing," Luke said. "Fence stays up. Herd stays here." Jonas smiled, slow and cold. "This land owes me a debt. Old man Hayes knew it. He is gone. Time to collect." "The law says the land belongs to Clara Hayes," Luke replied, "and I stand with her." Jonas's eyes narrowed a little. "You are just a drifter with a wedding band they forced on you. You could ride away and no one would blame you." "Maybe once," Luke said. "Not anymore." Behind him, the front door of the house opened. "Luke," Clara called. "What is it? Quote." Jonas's gaze flicked to her. She stood there with her hair braided over one shoulder, a shawl around her, the rifle in her hands. Her stance was steady, the barrel pointed down but ready. "Well now," Jonas said, "the old maid with a gun. Folks in town were right. You are a stubborn one." Clara stepped forward until she stood beside Luke. Her voice was clear and sharp. "This is my father's land. You have no claim here. Ride out." Jonas chuckled. "You think you scare me, girl?" "I am not trying to scare you," she said. "I am telling you, you want a fight, you get one." He studied the two of them standing there in the moonlight, a thin woman and a former troublemaker with a bad name. He had expected fear. Instead, he saw something else, a line they would not let him cross. He lifted his hand like he was tipping his hat, then his fingers snapped down. The man with the lantern swung it up, light flaring. The other rustler drew his gun. Luke saw the move and fired first. His shot hit the lantern, shattering glass. Fire spilled, then died in the dirt. The yard plunged back into shadow. Gunfire cracked in the dark. "Down!" Luke shouted, pulling Clara behind the low stone well. Bullets hit the side of the house, sending chips of wood flying. Clara's breath came fast, but her hands were sure as she worked the rifle. She peered over the edge, aimed at the shape of the man who had been cutting the fence, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out. A grunt answered. The shadow dropped. Jonas cursed. "Fall back," he barked to his remaining man. Luke fired again, catching the second rustler in the leg as he tried to mount. The man screamed and tumbled to the ground, clutching his thigh. Jonas wheeled his horse, anger burning in his eyes. For a moment, Luke thought he would charge anyway, guns blazing. Then Jonas looked at the small house with its bullet scars, the woman with the rifle who had just dropped one of his men, the cowboy with his steady gun. He sneered. "This is not over," he said. "You cannot watch every fence and every shadow. I will come back when you blink." "You already lost," Clara called. "You wanted us scared and running. We are still here." Luke looked at her, at the way she stood straight despite the danger, eyes burning. Pride hit him like a punch. Somewhere between the storm and this night, the word "old maid" had turned into something foolish and small compared to the woman she really was. Jonas spat in the dirt and kicked his horse hard. He rode into the dark, leaving his wounded man groaning on the ground. By the time the sheriff got there with 2 deputies, drawn by the gunshots, Jonas was gone. They took the wounded rustler into custody and listened as Luke and Clara told what had happened. Sheriff Boyd shook his head. "I figured you would bring trouble, Carter," he said. "I did not figure you would stand between it and this ranch." Luke wiped blood from a shallow graze on his arm. "Guess you were wrong." The sheriff looked from him to Clara. "You two could have been killed." he said. "You sure you want to stay out here with Pike still in the hills?" Clara and Luke shared a long look. The yard smelled of gunpowder and dust. The fence was cut, but the house still stood. The young mare in the stone shed snorted once, as if asking what all the noise had been about. Luke felt the old part of him, the part that wanted to run at the first sign of chains, stir. He thought of open trails and nameless towns. Then he thought of Clara in the storm, Clara at the table with her hair loose, Clara standing beside him with a rifle and fire in her eyes. He turned back to the sheriff. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "This is my home now." The words surprised him even as he said them, but they felt true in his bones. Clara's fingers tightened on the rifle. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. "This is my home," she said, "and my husband's. Pike can circle all he wants. We will not give it up." The sheriff studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then. I will send word to the judge. Seems that forced marriage woke up something useful." When the lawmen rode away, dawn was a pale line on the horizon. The ranch lay quiet again. Luke turned to Clara. The night's danger had left them both worn, but neither of them stepped back. "You should have stayed inside," he said softly. "And let you face them alone?" she replied. "No, that is not who I am." He nodded. "I know that now." Silence fell between them, but it was not the old heavy kind. It felt full of something waiting. "Clara," he said, voice low. "When they made us marry, I felt trapped. I hated it. I told myself I would serve my time and leave when I could." Her face shifted, pain flickering across it like a shadow. "I know," she said. "I heard it in every word you did not say." He took a step closer. The sky behind her was turning pink. Her hair was loose again, curls escaping her braid. "I was wrong," he said. "Somewhere between that storm and tonight, this stopped feeling like a sentence. You are the bravest person I have ever known. This land is hard, but you love it. You ran into danger for a horse. You stood in front of a killer for a home and a man who did not deserve you yet." Her eyes shone. "I do not want to pay off a debt and ride away," he went on. "I want to stay because I choose you, not because a judge told me to. Because somewhere along the way you took over this old, stubborn heart and made it want something more." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever said words like that to her. Men had called her useful, plain, strong, useless for marriage, never needed, never wanted. "How do I know you will not change your mind when the trail calls again?" she whispered. He reached out, slow, giving her time to pull away. She did not. His rough hand cupped her cheek. "Because for the first time in my life, the trail feels empty compared to this porch," he said. "Compared to you. You are my fight now, Clara. My peace, too." Tears spilled over her lashes. She did not brush them away. "I did not want a husband forced on me," she said. "I wanted someone who saw me, all of me, even the hard parts. You see them." "I do," he said. "I saw you too," she added. "The man who thought he was nothing but trouble. The one who believed he could not stay anywhere. You are more than that, Luke Carter." He bent his head, heart pounding, and kissed her. It was not a wild kiss like men stole in alleyways. It was slow and careful, full of all the words they had not found yet. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat there. When they parted, the sun was cresting the hills, spilling light over the broken fence, the scarred house, the little ranch that had almost been lost. Clara smiled, small and real. "Come on, husband," she said. "We have fences to mend." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, grinning in a way she had not seen before. They walked back toward the house side by side. The land was still rough. Jonas Pike was still out there somewhere. Life would not be easy. But the Hayes Ranch was no longer a lonely woman's burden or a drifter's punishment. It was their home. And the old maid the town whispered about had quietly taken over a cowboy's heart, piece by piece, until he could not imagine the wide world without her standing in the middle of it.